What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow, so today we are back going to be talking more about Survivor. So last week we were talking about Survivor after we covered the challenge, and coming up in June, we are going to be talking about Survivor South Africa. But today we are going to be talking about our thoughts of teenagers playing Survivor. So my name is Rachel.
I'm Alyssa, and in case you guys didn't know, Jeff Probst said at the season 40 reunion that people who were as young as 16 were welcome to apply to the show. I thought at first that he meant that, like, you can start applying when you're 16, you won't get picked until you're 18, but, like, just get your face in the rotation, I guess. But it sounds like maybe he meant that they would actually start casting 16-year-olds, and, like, there are so many reasons that this is a bad idea. I don't know who ever thought this would be a good idea. But
And yeah, literally, that is what we are going to be talking about today, how casting teenagers on this show is probably a bad idea. And Alyssa, I'm on the same page as you. I really do hope it meant, okay, get your face out there, get like popular with the casting directors before you turn 18. So by seasons 43, 44, they've already known you for 2 years. They recognize you. They know your face out of the thousands and thousands of people applying. So you're more likely to get cast, which hopefully that is the case. But even when you have 18-year-olds playing, we're going to talk about how that's still probably not a good idea. We think that 18 is still a little bit too young to be playing Survivor.
yeah, and just for like some context to this conversation, Rachel and I started this podcast when we were 17, I think. We were juniors in high school when we started this podcast. So obviously we've been like longtime Survivor fans, including when we were like too young to be able to apply to Survivor. And even when we turned 18, we had this whole discussion about how we would never want to play as an 18-year-old. So I guess part of the question is, why would you want to play as an 18-year-old? Because I feel like a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, like, you should be able to recognize as an 18-year-old yourself.
Yeah, I agree. So, for more context, Alyssa and I are 23 years old now. So, like Alyssa mentioned, with being 17 when we started this podcast, I distinctly remember when Brains Brawn Beauty 2 was on, we were talking about Julia Sokolowski. She was 19 at the time when she was cast and was playing Survivor. So, she's 25 now. We've also podcasted at the time in Millennials versus Gen X when Will Wall was on. He was 18 when he was on Survivor, born in 1997. He's 23 now, turning 24, so we're pretty much the same age. Michael Yerger was 18 also when he played Survivor on his season, and now he's 22, turning 23 this year. So we're like the same age, but technically Alyssa and I are a little bit older than Michael. So with this, I thought it's interesting because Julia and Michael both lied about their age, saying they were like 23 years old. So adding like 4 or 5 years onto their age, I think they could look at Michael definitely looks way older than he is. Will Wall didn't lie about his age on Millennials versus Gen X, but said he was 18.
Yeah, and I guess part of the lying about your age thing is a lot of times in challenges, there are alcoholic beverages as rewards. And I think we mentioned this in Will's season. Like, if he had chosen to lie about his age, would Jeff still make a big deal of being like, oh no, Will, you can't have the beer? So I feel like that was one snafu of being a younger person on Survivor that we mentioned as we were watching that season, where it's like, when playing Survivor, you have to follow all of the rules, the laws of the United States, in addition to the laws of whatever country that they're filming in. So because the legal drinking age in the United States is 21, even if the legal drinking age in Fiji was younger, and I think it is 18 in Fiji, you're still not legally allowed to drink alcohol while playing Survivor if you're under the age of 21. And since a lot of the challenges involve, or a lot of the rewards involve like alcoholic beverages, that's automatically something that you have to be like thinking about.
Yeah, and it's probably something if you were lying about your age, like Julia or Michael, if you were on a challenge that had alcohol, reward challenge, whatever, maybe you just not drink and then production can be watching you and you're not going to like sneak drinks of alcoholic beverages because you are underage. So they wouldn't like necessarily out your lie to the entire cast, because then like what was the point of lying if production accidentally messes up and is like, yo, you can't drink because you're not 21 but you lied and said you were 23 kind of thing. So hopefully that's the case. Big Brother, I believe the minimum age is 21 because they often do like parties with alcohol and stuff. And honestly, I could see Survivor, maybe they should raise the age to 21 as well, for the list of reasons of why having teens on Survivor is bad. And that's what Alyssa and I are going to be talking about. I think just maybe 21 would be a better age all around, because 18 does seem a little bit too young.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the big reasons, just before we even get into like why it's bad for the person playing, just like 18-year-olds are never going to win the game. And it seems kind of stupid to put in someone who is never going to win the game. No one is ever going to give an 18-year-old $1 million, especially because it feels like a lot of times people take into account the outside situation. And so it's like they might be more willing to give like a single mother the $1 million over someone else because of like their outside situation and their need for the money. And I think the youngest winner was Fabio, and he was 22,
21, yeah.
21 when he won. And even that, I feel like, was kind of like shocking, and just because they didn't really have anyone better to pick. So, yeah.
I agree. I think when you're that young, like, maybe it's a fault of the game, but I think people won't necessarily respect you because you are that young. And that goes to show how society is too. You know, people don't necessarily respect younger people. Even in the workforce, you look at people, and if they've been working for more years or they're older, you're like, oh, they must be better at their job or they're wiser because they're older, which may or may not be the case. But I think that can be reflected in Survivor as well, where if you were on a tribe and you had like 3 18-year-olds, I'm like, I don't know. I think you would look at them more as like people that you can lead around, people that you can influence, people that you can make like just be your little puppets in your back pocket. I don't necessarily think you would see them as the ringleader or someone who's the alpha or the person that is leading the entire alliance or tribe kind of thing. And yeah, with Fabio, he's the youngest at 21. And I actually like average out the average age of all 40 Survivor players. So you would count Sandra and Tony twice in there because they won at 2 different ages in their life. And the average age of all 40 seasons of the US version of Survivor of the winner is 31.3 years old. So a lot of the people are like in that kind of late 20s, early 30s, early 40s, with the oldest winner being Bob at 57.
And I guess part of that is also reflective of how, like, the age of the people cast. Mm-hmm. I guess you'd have to look and see whether or not the age of the average winner is younger or older than the age of the average Survivor contestant. But it seems to me like a lot of the people that they cast are in that general range. And if you're notably younger or older than somebody else on your tribe, like, that stands out. Like in Brains, Brawn, Beauty, when Joe was getting it done at 71, like that was something that kept being brought up. And I feel like the inverse is also true, where like if you're a lot younger, that also like gets brought up a lot if you're honest about your age.
Mm-hmm. Or if, like, being younger, you might be seen as like the baby of the group, versus like the older woman is often seen as like the mother figure of the group, even if that person doesn't even have children kind of thing. So it's sort of like those stereotypes that we see in real life coming into the game where, like, you know, I don't know. So I just feel like you were saying, if you're younger, it's more difficult to win, along with other factors like your gender and other things, and race and your physical athletic abilities. So it just, I don't know. I'm like, I don't want to play because we get voted out early for being young and small.
Yeah. And I think also one of the things to talk about is that 18 to 21-year-olds, like those people in the range, the late teens to early 20s, they're not mature physically or mentally or emotionally for that matter. Like, I think you reach your peak physical health in like your late 20s. Your brain doesn't finish forming until you're like 30. And then like emotional health is something that I feel like people continue to learn like throughout their life. So it's just one of those things where an 18-year-old might not have a lot of the like coping strategies necessary in order to be able to like do well on the island and not have permanent like scars, especially if it's someone who's like still growing. Like it just seems like such a bad idea.
Yeah, see, I was going to mention the brain developing thing as well because it's like other young people. Spencer Bledsoe was 21 the first time he played. After Survivor, he has talked a lot about his mental health. A lot of other survivors, even though they weren't like in their 20s, older Survivor players as well, have come out of the game and have said, oh, Survivor needs to have better like mental health therapists on the island, people that you can talk to. They need to have therapists for you to talk to after the show. And like years and years later, people are having problems because of the show and they haven't worked through their issues on the show because they didn't have those resources or they didn't know who they could talk to. So it's sort of like even young people like Spencer, who wasn't 18 when he's played, has talked at length about how his mental health has been so bad after the show.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of those things where it's their responsibility to everyone to have better mental health care. But it's especially true for young people because having a chronic mental health condition when you're young can predispose you to worse mental health conditions when you're older. So it's one of those things where like you might really get screwed up, which is not good, especially if, as we say, you're not likely to win the $1 million anyway.
Yeah, so it's more for the adventure, I guess. And there was a Reddit post about like Brandon Hance from a site called survivorscriblecouncil.com. And the article was talking how Brandon was 19 at the time he played. And then this quote from the article was saying they actually exploited a mentally unstable teenager for no reason other than, well, his uncle was pretty popular. And I think that's important to look at too. A lot of people see Brandon as like, oh, this is the reason why we shouldn't have young people on the show. And sure, he's probably like the edge case of something bad that can happen for people, but also looking at the people like Julia, Will, Michael, Spencer, like it just leads to a lot, and it could lead to a lot of mental health problems down the line if they, don't have those resources.
And I feel like you need to consider the edge case when you're making these kinds of like decisions. You need to consider like there are going to be some like younger people who do it for the wrong reasons. And part of that could be they need to have a better vetting process. Like I personally believe that Brandon never should have been able to like go onto the island in the first place. And so I guess that's one of the things where if you're going to allow younger people on, you need to be a lot more stringent with like your mental health checks and stuff like that before they get onto the island and everything is exacerbated.
Yeah, like the test that you have to do, the physical and all of those tests in order to qualify there for the show, at least like with Brandon Hance, it does seem like the article was saying that maybe, they were using him for views basically because he has that Hance last name and not really caring about, oh, he has these underlying issues, especially the second time we saw him when he like did that blow up at the challenge and then his tribe just voted him out right there. It really seemed like sort of icky to watch in a way because you're like, why is this being filmed? Why is this such a like thing for the cameras when like he's obviously going through something and then you have the tribe vote him out right there? Like it just seems so wrong, and I feel like you should have just removed him from the game, got him people to talk to. And it's like, I don't know, it's just that's one of the reasons why young people, and especially when your brain is developing, like you could really become like have a lot of mental problems later and during the show.
Yeah, and I feel like that's my main reason for being opposed to younger people playing Survivor, just because like the long-term effects, you might not be in a place where you can, deal with that. And I think that it's important that we don't let our entertainment supersede the lives and the health of the people who are entertaining us.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think another reason why this is a bad idea, having younger people, teens on the show, is that social media is so insane nowadays. You know, maybe at the beginning seasons of Survivor, when social media was in its like infant stages, you didn't really have that kind of instant feedback. But now you go online and, like, for Survivor people, I feel like if you're in the Big Brother universe, people on the internet are so harsh. They criticize you for things that aren't even game related. Like, people are picking apart your looks, your weight. Even if it's like not a game move, they're like, oh, this person looks funny. And then they like tweet you death threats and stuff like that. So, like, young people, even now, I'm like, I would not want to be on the internet going on some kind of reality TV show, because people have no filter. They're hiding behind the screen and they really tweet some really mean things. And I'm like, maybe that's with the mental health also, but like, how do you prevent that?
Yeah, and like my answer is I don't know how you prevent that. Like, obviously, we've seen that people will be rude to anyone on social media. And so I guess like until we as a society like get our shit together, I would not want to, like, if I were the parent of an 18-year-old who wanted to go on Survivor, I would be like, "Excuse me?" And especially if like a 16-year-old, heaven forbid, like that's insane to me. I would not want my 16-year-old child being ripped apart by strangers. Or even worse, for like young women, the amount of comments that I see like on Survivor like related media just about like the women's bodies because they're in bikinis so much, like, ugh, I feel gross reading them, and I don't even know these people. Like, I could not imagine like letting my 16-year-old daughter go on Survivor knowing that some perv somewhere is going to make a comment about how she looks in her bikini. Like, ugh.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's like, not even with social media, it's not like a problem, not only for young people, but even for the other contestants on the show. We saw during Winners at War, like, Denise deleted, unactivated, privated her social media. Wendell, I think, left social media. Ben left social media. So it's like, it affects all of the contestants and people, sending death threats, sending racist things. And it's like, you can't really shield young people from that because they will be on the internet. Maybe you can delete their accounts or private them so your child, if they're on the show, isn't going to be online reading these comments from people. But like, just having the thought that it's out there, I don't know, it's just sort of scary.
And again, it's one of those things where like it's not acceptable just because it's an older person, but like older people have hopefully developed like the coping mechanisms to deal with that kind of stuff, or at least have like a stronger support network or a stronger sense of self to be able to say like, I know what these people are saying about me, but I also know that that's not me. And I feel like that's something that a lot of younger people might lack. So
yeah, I guess being able to separate you as a TV personality and you as a person, maybe older people are able to do more. And even now, I think, Alyssa, if me and you went on some kind of reality TV show, I feel like because we podcast and we realize, okay, editing, you don't get to see everything that's on the TV show. They're edited to be interesting, and they're edited in a way to get viewers and ratings. So it's not the 100% truth. I think like someone like us, we can be able to separate that, but people who might not have had that experience, they might have difficulty like separating that, and then they would internalize what the people on the internet are saying.
And especially if you don't understand, like, why was I chosen as the villain or whatever? Like, why was I the one who had to get the short end of the stick, basically? And I think that, like, we've talked about unfair edits in the past. And I feel like that's one of those things where, like, sometimes it just happens. And that's really hard to accept, especially if your edit is just, like, unnecessarily, like, bad. So...
Yeah, I think let us know in the comments down below why you all, if you think having younger people on Survivor, 18, 17, 16-year-olds, is a good idea. Would you want them to raise the age limit to be 21 like Big Brother? Or do you like the thought of having a like teenager versus like their parent or their teacher season? Because that's what a lot of the rumors when Jeff Probst after season 40 asked, oh, if you have a cool parent or a cool teacher, ask them if you can play, seemed like they wanted to potentially do a parent teacher versus child season, which I'm like, if you had to get your parent or guardian signature as a 16-year-old because you're technically not of age legal, I don't know. I just think there's so many liabilities with like the law with having young people lower than 18 out there, because even though you signed the waivers and everything, it's like bad things could still happen, and then it's the parents' fault.
Yeah, we've said why we think it's a bad idea. Maybe one of you guys can change our minds. Maybe not. We love to read your comments. And like we said, soon we'll start talking about Survivor South Africa. Until then, we'll find other fun topics. If you have any ideas for other videos you'd like to see from us until Survivor South Africa starts, feel free to leave them in the comments down below.